Easy.
Hi, I'm Karen Kloosterman from Green Prophet, and today we have an eco-rabbi with us named David Pearlman Paran, and he's going to tell us all about his journey and what it means to be a rabbi of faith and the environment. Welcome.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you. Great to
Yeah.
see you.
Like our story goes back, right? Like we met years
We've
ago.
known each other,
And
I can't remember how many years, but it's got to be coming up to 15 years because I've been an environmental activist for most 25 years at least, and social activist and an educator. And actually becoming a rabbi, this is a new thing. I just became a rabbi officially a week and a half ago. I've been working, thank you. So that's the occasion. I got my hasmacha or smicha, as they say in English, a week and a half ago from the Schechter Beit Midrash, which is the Beit Midrash of the Masorti movement, which is known overseas sometimes as Masorti, sometimes as conservative, which is like a middle ground in Judaism, moderate traditional Judaism, and for me, being a rabbi is a way to combine all the areas of activity that I've had for, I'm not that young, and that I've been doing for many years. And one of them is definitely working for a sustainable society and sustainable future. And I've always been involved in education. Judaism and Israel are very important to me. And one of the reasons I moved here when I was young, 23, and part of the reason I moved here is because I wanted for my actions to affect Israeli and Jewish society without that being a side thing that I do, but my regular actions. And so I became an environmental activist here. That's how we met many years ago.
And can I just mention a little bit about our meeting and why, I found that a really great meeting, because I'd been working in environmentalism and I studied it in university, and I came to Israel and everything was such a mess here, like no recycling, just garbage everywhere, general lack of knowledge. And I met you you were working with the Heschel Center, I think, as an educator there. And we went on a tour and you took us around Tel Aviv and you started showing me things I didn't think about before. Like I started to think about the city as a social, the social element of the city and why it's important to think about things like billboards. Like you showed us the public space. Like, can corporations co-opt public space? Is that fair? Is that right? I mean, you really gave me a lot of questions I never thought about before. So I'm interested to see how your mindset goes into the faith-based aspect.
Wow, that's first of all, that's great to hear. And yeah, look, I also learned a lot from working at the Heschel Center, from working in Green Course, and already back then I was also involved in theatre. And you talk about public space, and I had a place theatre group which dealt with social and environmental issues through theatre in real places. And all of these things I see come together through being a rabbi with Judaism, because to me, the fundamental basis, or in fact, drive of the Torah and of Jewish thought and practice is about creating an ideal society, but not creating an ideal society as this thing that's up in the air, as this thing that this messianic society that's going to happen one day. Actually, a lot of the Torah deals, and also traditional Jewish law and discussion, deals with really, really practical issues. And when you look at them, they're about how we talk about the social aspects and living together in a community and in a city, and a lot of them are about how do we do that? How do we manifest that in practice? And for many years, and this is how all these things connect with both Israel and the other aspects and the idea of sustainable society. For many years, basically diaspora Judaism became about ritual and about, which is fantastic, and about these ideas in the spiritual and how to manifest them. And the idea of Israel was this abstract. Then with Zionism, the idea of Israel became about just settling the land, like making it practical, in fact, in being here. But combining it with Judaism, really what it's about is about, if we're going to live in our own land, in our own space, as a Jewish society, it should be based on values. And if we look at those values, they're values about respecting the land. There's a fundamental value which says, it says in the Torah, the land is mine. Like, the land belongs to God. The land doesn't belong to individuals. And what that means is not, so it's not specifically about giving tribute. It's about saying, okay, we have to take care of it. We have to take care of the land. And it also has an economic aspect. It means we can't amass masses of land at the expense of other people, because that's going to damage both the land and the society. And it has to do with economic equality. It also has to do with agricultural practices and then industrial practices. There's Jewish concepts of not harming the common, the commons, and that they have a hard some of these things I think about in Hebrew, and then I have to translate.
There's issues. I know that you're supposed to build factories outside this, or polluting things outside of the city center. I mean, that's something they talked about 3,000 years ago, right?
Right, exactly.
And and I think things come up today in the social space, like about light, like what happens when you build a new building. You actually steal the light from the neighbors who were there before. Or this hyper development in Israel, I mean, and everywhere. And
exactly.
So like, how do you, what does this mean though, in practice? I mean, are you going to go to the Knesset? Are you going to lobby? Or what does this mean? Are you going to have
that's my
followers?
Wife's job. That's my wife's job. My wife is a former Knesset member, and hopefully future as well. But what I see it in different, I'm starting out in many ways, but I see the connection between these works in different areas. One is just in the regular teaching and thinking. If I give a Torah drasha, a sermon a week, a weekly talk on the Torah portion, all of them are informed by my ideas about sustainability and the connection between sustainability and Judaism. So an example is actually coming up next week, not this week, next week. Next week's Torah portion is the second part of the trilogy of the Joseph story. And it's when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams about the Nile, and about the coming out of the Nile, the 7 fat sheaves and the 7 thin sheaves, and the interpretation that I gave already last year, and I returned to it a lot. I think it's a really important story, this story. And in that story, it says that all of the wise people of Egypt and the wizards and the advisors, the way I'd always learned it is they couldn't interpret the dreams. And Joseph comes along and he interprets these dreams. But the way it's actually written, and that always I thought, when I was a kid, Joseph's so clever. But when you read it, it's not really that hard to understand what the dreams mean. There's these 7 fat cows eat the 7 thin cows. It's you can sort of, maybe not the 7 years is
maybe the wizards were somehow blinded too. Maybe they had
it says,
some kind of blind spot.
Right. Well, what it says literally, it doesn't say they couldn't. It says they didn't. There's none of his wise people gave him the interpretation of the dream. And Joseph comes along and gives him the interpretation.
He bothered to do it.
He bothered to do it, or the interpretation that I gave, which is relevant to today, I think, is that I think that at least some of the Egyptian wise men, they're not stupid. They understood generally what the dream was saying. But do you want to tell the rule of the land, okay, you're going to have some good years, but then you're going to have some bad years, and I don't know what to do about it also? Because what did Joseph come along and do? Exactly. Joseph came along and said, he's saying, he's the nothing, and he's saying to the king of, basically the president of the United States, look, you're going to have, the economy's going to go down. It's going to be a disaster. You're going to have some boom years, and then you're going to have some devastation. And there's something you can do about it. And what you need to do about it is, when things are good, you need to reduce consumption, You need to conserve things. You need to work out how we deal with our resources so that we will have resources for the lean years later on. That's not something that a ruler wants to hear, and it's not something that somebody wants to tell them. And if you think about it today, it's really relevant, because people don't want to come. People don't want to hear things are going to be bad. People don't want to hear, we're consuming too much. We need to balance these things. We need to divide it up equitably. We need to be able to manage our resources so that everybody will have enough to survive. And the only way to do that is to make sure that when we do have abundance, we manage it properly. And that's what Joseph comes along and says, which is radical. And what's interesting is that the crucial number here, which Joseph interpreted, was the 7. And I think this whole story is preparing us for the sabbatical year, which I think is the most fundamental concept in Judaism, but was not that relevant for thousands of years. And is still not. I mean, we don't practice it, but the idea of the sabbatical year really combines the things that you mentioned, the social, the economical, and the environmental aspects of a sustainable society. Now, okay, so I've gone on and given this whole sermon, but yeah, right. And what are you asking about how I do this in my rabbinic work? So one way is teaching. It comes across if I'm giving a sermon, if I'm teaching lessons, if I'm emphasizing different aspects, but it has to have a practical aspect as well. So I am the practicing rabbi of a community here in Pardes Chana, and so we try as
Pardes Chana is north of Tel Aviv, right? It's about an hour.
Pardes Chana is about halfway between Haifa and Tel Aviv, near Caesarea, just inland from Caesarea. So it's growing. It's not quite a city, but it's almost a city.
Well, the people of Tel Aviv left for there during COVID, right? A lot of people.
Right. A lot of people moved up, and it's got a strong artistic community, also a strong sort of alternative, hippie, new age, environmental, but it also has older people who've been here for generations, formerly agricultural, and also has a whole lot of immigrants. Very, very mixed community. We have a relative mixed town. We have a very relatively small Masorti traditional community, but we try in our congregation to as far as possible implement these ideas to the extent that we can. And we have a communal meal once a month, which makes sure that people who don't necessarily have somewhere to have a Shabbat dinner can join us, but it also means that there's the social cohesion and the idea of, because there is an issue of social sustainability and creating communities, and we make sure that those and all of our functions we don't use any disposables, we use reusable, but also the idea of the communal dinner. And we have many, for different festivals we do things like this where everybody brings some food, and it's not a radical idea, and other communities do it, but it's an important way of implementing these ideas, and that we try and maintain that the whole community doesn't have disposables, for example. And we also, apart from our regular activities, try and do activities to help to improve society. So we have a connection with a permaculture farm, a local permaculture farm, which is itself a social initiative which works with teenagers who've dropped out of the school system, and they're the workers on this farm, and then it creates organic produce which it sells locally. So we engage with them, both raise money, volunteer, and also try and have a partnership with them. And then whenever we have we try in different ways when we have events and festivals to try and find ways that we can work not only within the community but without to improve the society. So that's on the community level. And then on a wide level, this is intention. It's not actually. But my aim is to join. There are a bunch. I'm not on my own here. There are a bunch of people working both rabbis and people who are working with the connection with Judaism and sustainability and environment. There's an organization called Teva Ivri. I don't know what it's called in English.
We'll add the link later.
What's it called?
I said we'll add the link later.
You'll add the link later, right? So they've been working for years with that connection, and they actually had last year was a sabbatical year, and they had a big program about the sabbatical year. And one of the things I aim to do is connect. I know a number of people. There's also a rabbi called Jonathan Nerel in Jerusalem who's just released a book which is an Acco Bible with environmental interpretation of the Bible. There's a bunch of people. There's some local people. There you go. So what I aim to do is try and create a connection and create a network and work together to both spread these ideas and increase them, but also work together to see how we can be a voice on a practical level for Israeli society in general. So I think it's really
like one of the things that's happened recently in society. It seems that people in Tel Aviv, they have quite a dominant voice when it comes to the media. They are also somehow rejecting Jewish education in schools. And I see that's become a big problem for some people that don't want it, and some people who do want it or think it's important, because Israel was founded to be a Jewish homeland and a Jewish state for people after the Holocaust, as we know. Of course, we also know that we share this land with people of other faiths too, but still, what do you think about this? You're in a good place, and you're in Pardes Chana, and you're working with some other people who are like you, but do you have any way to integrate with people who may actually have a distaste for Jewish tradition and mitzvahs and values? And
look, that is the big challenge in Israel at the moment. There is this sense, and it's been growing since Israel's founding, I think, this sense of a division between the so-called religious and the so-called secular. What's peculiar about that is that the largest subgroup in Israeli Jewish society defines, and in Israeli Arab society for that matter, defines itself as traditional, defines itself as neither religious nor secular, but as traditional, but having a connection with the tradition, but not wanting to. Basically, the way I interpret that is they don't want to be in a segregated group as either, which is anti another group, as either secular or religious.
They don't want to be defined. They want to feel free and
be connected with the tradition. And it's the same word that we use to define the what's called overseas the conservative movement in Israel is the Masorti movement, it's the traditional movement, and unfortunately there's a whole bunch of forces, but in particular the politics cause the polarization, and it amplifies the voice of those who represent the so-called religious and those who represent the so-called secular, and that creates this fight between them. I think now, in particular, with the new government that is not yet formed, but that seems to be both making this more difficult, but also more important. That people want to hear a voice of moderate Judaism that says neither of these polarizing voices have a monopoly on Judaism. Neither those who say it's only like this, and neither those who say, well, it's like that, so I don't want it. There is a place for a voice for Judaism which speaks to people. And one of the things that I talk about, and this is the challenge of, I see what we represent as, and this actually the image is an image which connects with what you were talking before about spaces and sustainability. I see us like a public square. And that's where, like at an intersection in Israel in particular, there's these traffic, in Pardes Chana there's a lot of these traffic circles, which some of them are beautiful, like they're covered in grass and they're nice, but most of the time you just drive past them because they're at an intersection between getting from one place to another. Now, I see what we represent as being on that intersection, and the challenge is to get people to stop and say, it's not just an intersection which I pass through, it's somewhere where we can stop and we can meet together, and we can adopt that place. There's this big circle of grass in the center of town that no one uses. Why don't we use that and use that a place where we can meet together? We don't all have to agree. I was at there was a talking about the controversy. There was a big protest in Pardes Chana on Saturday night about, this is getting political, that there was a controversial film that the council at the last minute said couldn't be shown in a public building, and so they projected it in front of the council building, and there was a big and a lot of people, hundreds of people turned out. But there was also on the other side a smaller group, but very, very vocal, who were against the projection of the film and were protesting it. And there was this sense of this physical division. In fact, police, we're a tiny town, well, not tiny, but relatively small and quiet town, and police came in the middle and divided up like these big protests and this fear of violence. And the people, I was with the people, I was against the idea of silencing the film. And so I went to the protest, and the spokesperson there was responding to these. There was very violent talk from the other side, and was responding with this, also with a dialogue which is a kind of us and them sort of dialogue. And I asked to talk, and I took the microphone, and I basically gave a Torah sermon like I just did before.
But you didn't say it was a Torah sermon, or did you?
Well, I did.
Because then they might be like, "Oh, we don't want to hear this guy."
No, well, that's it. No, I made the point of saying it. I said, okay, I'm going to give. It was Saturday night. I'm going to talk about the day. I said, I'm talking about this week's Torah portion, in which a terrible thing happened, and Jacob was silent, and about not being silent. But I also talked about us being one people with one Torah, and also that we're talking about democracy, that I'm happy that there's people on the other side here also. I'm not happy about the way they're expressing themselves, but I'm happy that they're here. That's the idea of democracy, is that we can have people on both sides. And this was really well received. At least this was like what I said was really well received. Got a lot of applause. People came to me and said that they accepted it. And I think that that's the point, that there is a need for a voice with that's unapologetically connected with Jewish tradition, but also represents values that are relevant to a lot of people, and that can be a bridge. The evening ended with a lot of people. I was talking to a lot of people from both sides, and that's the way it should be. And I think that there is this opportunity that this kind of thinking, and also dealing with issues which people don't automatically associate with Judaism, like we were talking about, like sustainability, which I think, as I said, are fundamental. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's the challenge of, okay, what is the relevance of Judaism to Israeli society today in modern times? That's the challenge. That's the relevance. And now, it doesn't mean.
How would that, because we don't have a lot of time left, I want to ask you two more questions. One is about what you do, what your work can do to bridge, make a bridge between, the Jewish group of people in Israel and maybe the Islamic or the Muslims and the Christians and people of other faiths, because they tend to be actually mostly defined as traditional people, which is different, right? So and also I'd like you to sort of sum up, after you speak a little bit about that, like just give us a few things, like 3 things that we need to do or think about. Okay, it can be practical things, it can be philosophical things. Okay, that we need to do today, coming from the eco rabbi. Okay.
So, with regard to interfaith, first of all, I believe, again, that the two things are connected. I think that the idea of place, that we share a common place and we have to work out how to live together here and based on values, that's the idea to me that should be at the basis of any sort of political solution to what's going on, and to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and being able to talk from the point of view of tradition and values is a way to find a lot of common ground. Now, there are organizations, there are initiatives, and there are people doing this. I am not strongly involved in them yet. I hope to be, and I hope, and I do believe that can join with what I was previously talking about as a voice which connects and doesn't need to involve total agreement, just needs to be a way that a language that connects and that people feel that a mutual respect. You often there is a people who are faithful to their own traditions often can find a mutual respect with other people who are faithful to their own traditions. And there are, obviously, we have a common ancestor, and we're all children of Abraham, but I mean that's not even necessary. We're all children, we're all human beings. But finding that as the basis for dialogue, but not just dialogue, as I say, not just dialogue on a spiritual level, but also on a practical level. And it's not that I have, it's preparing for the next question, it's not that I have all the solutions in my hand, and I don't think that's what's needed. What's needed is to ask the right questions. And if that dialogue is about asking the right questions and searching together and saying, okay, what are your values on these issues, like how water resources and how do we deal with water resources, which is crucial. We're in a desert area for our future. And if we look at them based on our traditions and use that at least as a voice in the discussion and saying we need to talk about this, and we come at it from, say, the Jewish tradition and the Muslim tradition and say, okay, let's see what our different traditions say about this and what that can say about how we should be managing things here. And we may find that that allows both a dialogue between the different cultures, but also dialogue between the different peoples, which can have practical impact.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes. You can tell us about some things. If you think off the top of your head, should we stop eating meat? Should we, I mean, are there...
Yes, yes, we should. I don't eat meat. But I see, this is an interesting thing. This is something that I think that working with tradition and from tradition can find really good ways about dealing with these things. Because if you look at the Jewish tradition about meat eating, originally, and this is based on our tradition, in the Garden of Eden, if you read, it's literally in the Torah, the first people were not allowed to eat meat. And there are these different Jewish traditions that ideally would be vegetarian. But there's also, and Rav Kook, who was one of the founders. I
love Rav Kook, yeah.
Right. So he was a great leader from over 100 years ago in the Jewish return to Israel, and he was vegetarian and spoke about it. But there's also this idea that you shouldn't promote vegetarianism because it's being overly self-righteous. And it's funny that exists in our tradition, because I think we all know some vegetarians and vegans who at least come across that way. And this idea that saying everyone needs to be vegetarian, you know, that we're not at that level yet that we need to be. But if you look at all these things in Jewish tradition, like even the idea of the sacrifices, which seems, what we talk about sacrificing animals, the idea of sacrificing animals was clearly originally, it said, okay, you're not allowed to eat meat all the time. If you're going to eat meat, it has to be given a spiritual meaning and only on special occasions, and you give it the spiritual significance. The ideas of eating kosher limits the amount of meat. And there's this idea that, look, we're going to put in these practices that say, think about how much meat you eat. Don't take it for granted. And maybe, you know, if you want to go the extra step, be vegetarian or be vegan, that's really good. And I think that's a good way of talking about things, is in terms of values rather in terms of dogma, which is funny coming from Judaism, which sometimes is seen as being dogma. And for sure, you know, there's the kosher laws and they're strict, but they seem to be presenting a value and a way of living, which is basically what a kosher laws say. Think about what you eat. You just don't automatically eat everything. And I think that's what food is a crucial issue. You said one thing. I think about food and energy are probably the two most crucial steps that we need to take. We need to think about them, think about how we produce them, how we use them, and what the effects of them are. Both. Okay, I'll end with this. There is the slogan which affected me when I was a teenager, when I first heard, I think it was David Suzuki for the first time I ever heard, he mentioned the slogan, think global, act local. And I could really identify with that. But I think that's also fundamental to Judaism. There is, Hillel's precept, I'll say it in Hebrew and then translate it, which I think says the same thing, but even in a stronger way, both because it's questions and because it's open-ended. It says, if I'm not for me, who will be for me? I have to think about myself and what's around me and my needs. When I'm only for me, what am I? If I'm only acting in my own self-interest, then I'm not anything. I have to be looking at around about and the effects of everything on others. And if not now, when? We have to act. We have to be active in trying to answer these questions and deal with them. Very
nice. I think our next talk will have to be about energy. Okay, and what's happening here. And this hopefully will just start our series. Thanks a lot, David.
Thank you, Karen. Lovely to talk to you. Lovely to see you again.
Our eco rabbi from Israel. Take care.
Pleasure.